can you prepare for your first semester of nursing school? Going into it, I looked up everything, like all day, every day. I would type up something like, okay, how can I get prepared for nursing school? What do I need to do? What things do I need to get? All that stuff. So I'm going to just tell you things that I've learned while going through this, and I hope this helps. So 1, you need school supplies, whether that be a binder paper, printer paper, highlighters, pens, pencils, calculator, little tabby things to make notes in your book, a recorder if your school allows you to. Make sure you get permission first. Anything that you think you need, or anything that you've tried before and that works for you, I would get it. So the only thing that I really did that was really different for me is I don't use binder paper with lines anymore. I just use printer paper, and for whatever reason I seem to like it. For one, I don't feel that I'm limited to just writing in the lines. I just write wherever I want to, and I can make pictures on the paper, and I can color things, and for whatever reason it works for me. So that's what I'm going to continue doing, is just using printer paper in my binders, and then I just hole punch them and I stick them in a notebook. Also, in the beginning, my first video, I showed you guys that huge binder that I had, and I put everything in there and I broke it down by exams. In retrospect, it's probably not the best idea. For one, that binder got really heavy very quickly, okay? And I started to notice my shoulders starting to bother me because I'm lugging around inside my bag that had water and books and pens and pencils and everything. It gets heavy quickly. So just get a little 1 inch, 1.5 inch, maybe 2 inch binder, and then just put the stuff that you're working on for that exam in there, and then transfer that, once you go into the next exam, into a bigger binder to hold it in. So still get the big binder, but do not carry it with you all the time to class, okay? Because it's just not practical, and it's just too heavy, and it's just, don't. I would say before you go into nursing school, practice your med math if you can. Now, it is very easy math for some, and for some people they have difficulties. It is pretty much, addition, subtraction, multiplication, turning pounds into kilograms, how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon, how many ounces are in how many milliliters are in an ounce. So it's that kind of stuff. But if you're not familiar with it, I would say practice it. I got this book from a friend before I started. It's Henke's Med Math, Dosage Calculation, Preparation, and Administration. Definitely a good thing to do is to practice your math. I did this before I actually went in, and I had a pretty easy time with my math until the last few quizzes. Then I started making little mistakes, but I'm going to attribute that to stress and everything else that was going on in my life at the time. But definitely practice your med math, okay? So things like rounding, that's very big. Knowing how many decimal places, how much you're going to pull up in a syringe, depending on the type of syringe it is, that kind of stuff. Practice it, and that will help you to go further into your clinicals. Once you get your books for class, I would say have maybe 1 or 2 resources to help you back up the information, or something that makes it a little bit easier to understand. Textbooks give a lot of information, and sometimes there's a lot of filler information, things that you don't even need to know. So I would say get a resource book that helps to kind of condense everything into something that's a little bit easier to understand, and it just quick gets to the point. Because for one, when it comes time for your exams, you would rather look at that information than go back to your book and try to read everything again, because that could just be too much. But 2, resources also have extra questions that you need to practice. And I would say before going into any exam is definitely practice those questions and do the practice exams as well. For one, it will help to reduce anxiety getting ready to take the test. But 2, you also get familiar with the way in which they're going to ask questions and how you should think. So always read the rationales, both the right answers and the wrong answer, so you can understand why you got it wrong. I would say get an NCLEX book also. Now, a lot of people say that, you should wait to do your NCLEX until you're completely done with the program. For me, I disagree. I don't like to encounter anything that I don't know. I would much rather be able to prepare for something ahead of time. So get the NCLEX book and maybe practice doing 5 to 10 questions a week. At least. If you could do more, definitely do more. Somebody told me 75 questions a day. I'm not doing that. It's not going to happen. That's just way too much. But do 5 to 10 questions a week at least. And, you'll start to build your confidence in answering these questions, but also the kind of stuff they're looking out for. But, what's also really important is that these NCLEX books and these resources books give you a lot of tips on how to take tests. And I would say, even when you don't know any of your information, knowing how to take a test and how to answer these questions will save you. For instance, on my last exam, I think there was like two answers that really could have been either one, was it? And I had no clue. And what I did was I used a test taking strategy, was look for answers that are patient-centered. And one answer was a patient-centered answer. And I chose it, and I happened to get it right. And when we were talking about it later in class with our instructors, I was saying how I use my test taking strategies, and they were like, that is a good, point. You should definitely do that. But a lot of times, the answers, they may seem difficult, and there's a lot of information you have to try to weed through and figure out what's right, what's wrong. Make sure you don't choose an answer that if it has one part of the answer is wrong, that means all of it's wrong. Never choose an answer because, most of the answer that they gave you seems right. If there's one part that you do not like, do not choose that answer, because then the whole answer is wrong. So those test-taking tips are definitely the best thing, I would say, to practice before you go into exams also. Form a group also, a study group, people that you can trust who are reliable, dependent. Don't just make a group if it's, just you and your friends, because if you know how your friends are and if they don't seem really reliable and they're going to be depending on you to make the study guides, or they're asking you questions all the time, that's not going to help, because then you're only helping them and you're not going to help yourself at all. So, make a group where everyone's going to work hard, and make a group that, maybe there's one or two people that you don't even know, but they do really well on exams. You want to link up with those people because you want to find out what is it they're doing that is right, and how you can learn from them. So before you even start class, read the chapters, highlight anything you don't know, go to the class with questions, listen to what the teacher is saying, and highlight what the teacher is saying in a different color. So when you go back to make your notes, you can put in extra emphasis on what the teacher said, because that may be a question that they later ask on the exams. And a lot of times teachers don't even say hint, this will be on the exam. Sometimes they'll just say something, and it's up to you to catch it or not. So pay attention, highlight whatever they say in a different color. Also, go over all the figures. There have been a few times that I've happened to look over a figure right before the exam just because I was like, oh no, I didn't look at any of the figures. And there happened to be at least 4 or 5 questions on there from a figure. So look over the figures, tables, boxes, all of that. Look over it and take little tiny notes or anything that you think that may be important. I would check that out also. I would say anytime you have a question, don't be afraid to ask in front of the class. Even if it sounds like a silly question, a lot of times other people have the same questions as you, and you don't want to ask that question, so just ask. And even if it is a silly question, oh well, you don't know everything, and this is the whole reason why you're here. So don't feel weird about asking questions in front of 70, 80, however many people. Ask it, because once they answer it and you understand that, that's something that you've laid down for yourself. You don't have questions about it anymore, and you're able to move on. Even if everyone else knows the answer, it doesn't matter. You need to know it for you. So if there's anything that's unclear or you're not sure about, go ahead and ask. I would say make a study guide from day one. I did not make my study guides until, maybe a week or two before my exam actually came. And it became more of a race against the clock. I wanted to make sure I fit everything in there, but then you need to make sure that you make the study guide ahead of time. That way you can actually go and study the study guide. So if you're spending the whole time making your study guide right before the exam, and then your exam's like the next day, you haven't actually retained anything because you're just copying and pasting or putting all your notes together or typing everything up into the study guide. So make the study guide from day one. What I'm doing now is I'm taking notes on whatever I read, and what I think is important, I'm typing it up now. And then as it gets closer, or when my teacher actually starts to lecture on it, I will highlight things that she says in my study guide. That way I know what to go on from. And then also, after you have an exam, go back over that study guide and highlight anything that was on your study guide that was on the exam. That way when you go for your final exam, you can look over those key points also, but then you kind of get an idea of what kind of stuff they're actually focusing on. So in the beginning of our very first lecture, they talked a lot about dates and who were the important people that started nursing. None of that stuff was on the exam. So you want to make sure that you focus only on what is important. Don't highlight everything. Don't take notes on everything. Highlight things and take notes on things that you think is important and what the teacher says. So that will definitely help you. And then also when you get ready to study for your final exam, you already have all your study guides already made, and then you just put it together and you study just from that. And if there's anything you need to further elaborate on, you go to your textbook. But you don't have time to reread the entire textbook. It's just not going to happen. At least for me, it won't, because I'm also working, and it was just too much, and it's too much of a stress. So I think for me that helped. I think this is also important. I didn't know this before going into it, but I was taking tips on how to read a textbook, and it was saying, like, you know, don't read word for word, look at the headings, maybe read the first and the last sentence, look at the figures. All that stuff, it definitely helps. But you need to ask your instructors, where do they really focus their questions on? And if the teacher tells you that they focus on the textbook, read the textbook. Read it word for word. Even though I know it's annoying and it can be too much. Like, definitely skip things that are like filler information where they start talking about history and stuff. Like, don't worry about that. But read word for word. That way you can understand everything. And if there's a chance that maybe even one question is on there, you get it, because that could be a difference between an A and a B. So just read it. After you take an exam, always review after. So our school, they have a thing where you take your exam and then you make an appointment and you go and you meet with your instructor and then you review your exam. And I think it's important that you do that, because then this is your chance to really ask the instructor why, you know, that particular answer was right or why your answer was wrong. But also they can give you a little insight onto, you know, keywords you should have looked for in that question, so you can prepare yourself for it. So always review your exams, and if you can, when you get ready to take your final, ask to see all your exams before. So again, you can look at the type of questions they ask, you can see where you made mistakes, and you can figure out what your problem is. If your problem is not reading the question all the way through and going ahead and answer, you'll figure out, okay, let me always read the question all the way through. If your problem is you don't know the content, make sure you review that content. If your problem is test taking tip strategies that, you know, it's between one of the two, and, you know, if you would have chose the other answer, you would have been right, but the other answer was good, then, you know where you need to focus. So always review your exams. And my last thing for classes is whenever you have a class that talks about any disease processes, organize that material. Make a separate note or type up, or make something separate that lists all the disease processes that you are encountering in that lecture or in that exam 1, period 2, whatever. And break that down by, you know, what is the etiology, what is the medications I would use to treat, what things should the nurse look for, what are the signs and symptoms, all that. And write that down ahead of time. That way when you go to read for your exam,